Hi, everyone, and welcome to A Screenwriter's Take. My name is Tony D, and we have a very special edition of A Screenwriter's Take. My guest is CB, and we just saw Avengers Endgame. We're here, of course, with Joan of Arc, and we're going to talk about the movie, and we're going to give you the non-spoiler review first, and then we're going to break down the screenplay a little bit and talk about it from a screenwriter's perspective. Avengers Endgame as a movie, just sort of your gut feeling, is it's a decent movie. In that there's lots of payoffs. There's a bit of nostalgia to it. We just got back from the diner talking about this, and we were talking about how there's a lot of fan service. It's definitely all fan service.
I would say 99% of it is fan service. This is the 22nd film in the MCU, I think. And there's callbacks to literally all 21 movies before it. And if you haven't seen those, you're definitely not going to get entirely what's going on. So if this is called from a screenwriter's perspective, is it a good movie from that perspective? Um, I'm still debating that.
I think it is only because it has too many payoffs for it not to be good. I mean, after 22 movies, they are finally wrapping up a lot of characters.
If you've seen those movies.
If you've seen those movies,
If
yeah,
you
that is key. I mean, I totally agree with you. If you haven't seen the MCU movies, you're wasting your time with this movie, and even Infinity War, you'd be totally lost. You wouldn't know who half the characters are, and you really have to see every single movie. That's the thing. Like Ant-Man, if you haven't seen the Ant-Man movies, you'd be totally lost. That
I
that Ant-Man and the Wasp is a key movie in this sequence.
and in terms of the box office, I don't know if everybody has seen Ant-Man and the
I
Wasp,
know.
or the original Ant-Man. So the tie-in there might be lost on some people.
So if you've seen my previous videos, you know that I went on record as saying Scott Lang, Ant-Man, is my favorite character in the MCU because I think he had the biggest character arc. And I was really happy to see him play such an important role in this movie. Now, without getting into the specifics, it wasn't a total 100% win, but it was about an 80% win for Scott, I think.
70%.
70, 80.
70, 80.
Yeah. Um, and it's hard to talk about the problems. The problems are I think, the negatives or the positives outweigh the negatives, I would say.
Oh,
Would you agree?
definitely. Definitely. There are some really strong moments there. But then again, it only truly pays off if you've seen Ant-Man, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and
Yeah.
all the other movies from the MCU. So, I mean, that's is it really technically a screenplay that we just saw, or was it like a patchwork collection with a very maybe perhaps thin through line,
Yeah.
maybe?
Yeah, and I mean, if another movie you would have had to have absolutely seen is Civil War. If you didn't see Civil War, the middle act too is just like what? The first Avengers movie plays an important role. I mean, it's just everything. Every movie plays an important role.
Yeah, and I don't know if we've seen that before we've seen that on television where you have an episodic series where they do callbacks and certain plots take like years to develop, a la Game of Thrones,
Right.
or even like some of my favorite shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or other things that are episodic in nature like that. So, in terms of like a movie, a film script as a standalone, I mean, this is like uncharted territory here in some ways.
Yeah. I would give it overall. I would give it about, I don't know, like a 6.5, 7 out of 10.
That's if you've seen the Marvel
Yeah.
movies. If you haven't seen them, you're going to be like, what just happened? Uh,
Okay, that concludes our non-spoiler review. So if you haven't seen this movie, or you're being wary of spoilers, and there are big spoilers ahead, you got to stop now and see the damn movie. because we're going to get into it. Okay, Act One. Act One really has a prologue, right?
Yes.
And
Almost like you would call like a cold open in a TV show before the credits roll.
would you say that's Hawkeye, or I was thinking the whole lead up to the first defeat of Thanos is a prologue almost.
Yes. No, you're right. That is very interesting how they do that. Um, yes, I would have to agree with that. That is definitely a prologue because it is a very long movie.
Yeah, yeah, and I was thinking about it in the car, and it's like it's not like there's 4 acts in the movie, or 5 acts or 6 acts. It's almost like 2 movies in a way, where the second movie is just one big fight at the end. Like the third act is just one giant fight. Which again, just like an Infinity War, 13-year-old me would have been like, "This is the greatest movie ever made. I could watch this every day for the rest of my life."
But don't you think maybe that like a 13-year-old might be kind of bored in some of the sequences, particularly in the beginning? There's a lot of heavy stuff going on.
In the beginning, yeah,
Yes,
it's
and
dark.
there's not like a lot of fights until they get to Thanos, and that in itself is a pretty dark ending for the, I guess, the OG version of Thanos. To spoil it, the Thanos is killed in the beginning of the movie, and after that, the movie shifts to 5 years later.
Yeah, and it seemed very arbitrary that 5 years. I wasn't sure why they chose that frame of time. It could have just as easily been 2 years, 1 year. It kind of didn't matter. I guess it was only because they wanted to have Tony Stark's kid be about 5.
I think that's the main reason why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And have him have some sort of retirement before the big payoff at the end.
Yeah, because he's settled at that point, and it's kind of like a callback to action, and it's going to take a lot to bring him out of like his little shell that he's created for himself.
Yeah.
Tony Stark's all about creating shells for himself, so.
Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, as I said in the diner.
Well, plus it gives them the opportunity to go 5 years later. Look at this big dramatic effect with the caption and the screen.
Yeah, and again, Scott Lang for Scott Lang, the 5 years later works. And God, if you haven't seen Ant-Man and the Wasp, you're gonna be totally lost in this movie. I mean,
well, it's not going to be as fun if you haven't seen it yet because.
Yeah. And it's so good. Ant-Man and the Wasp is so good, and there's only like one line in that movie that sets up this movie, the whole thing with the time vortexes, which is key to this movie. Like, how can you put the entire sequel to Infinity War on that one line in a movie that no one was guaranteed to see really at this point? And then meanwhile, they hype the shit out of Captain Marvel like it's... And let me also say, every second of Captain Marvel is dead in this movie. It's just, she sucks the energy out of everything. It's awful. She was totally unnecessary and could have been cut out of the movie. I wish I had the Infinity Gauntlet to get rid of Captain Marvel.
You'd snap her away?
I'd snap her away in a second.
Well, they definitely snapped her haircut away in a second. I mean, Okay, so in the first little section there, she shows up from outer space because Nick Fury had sent the signal, was in his little like pager thing from
which doesn't show up in this movie for some reason, and showed up at the end of Captain Marvel. Like,
oh yeah, they're sitting there with the little pager, and it doesn't really explain like how she arrives, because doesn't she arrive at the end of Captain Marvel?
Yeah, and then she arrives and saves Tony Stark like a second time, which is confusing to me.
It was strange. No, her whole it just sort of seems like retrofitted in some way that Captain Marvel's in this movie.
Yep.
And fortunately, she's only in it for maybe 10 minutes. She's not in it that much. I mean, she's gone for most of the movie. She's out in space protecting all the other planets that have gone through the snap as well. So it's very altruistic, that Captain Marvel. Uh,
We're told.
We're told.
But as you know, screenwriters, you don't tell, you show.
Exactly.
And they showed nothing for Captain Marvel other than she's powerful and has a bad haircut 5 years later.
It had to have been a wig, though, right? That's not Brie Larson's real hair, is it?
Oh, no. She wouldn't walk around with that butch haircut.
Yeah. No, it's...
That's from the comic. That's from the new SJW comic, Captain Marvel. They gave her short hair because, like, I guess they're trying to ruin the character as much as possible. I don't know. But there was... I don't want to get into see my Captain Marvel screenwriter's take if you want to hear me rant about that.
Oh, that's right. You have a video about Captain Marvel as well, don't you? Yeah. No, that's... There's a big difference between Ant-Man and the Wasp and Captain Marvel in terms of film construction and then in terms of payoffs, because Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is full of heart and soul, and you can see it in the script that everything in that was very economical and drove the story forward. And every scene with Scott Lang in this movie is very economical and drives the movie forward until the end, when they don't really give him much to do in that final battle scene, which takes place like over what seems like 40 minutes.
Right. So the first act is Scott coming back and everybody trying to piece together their lives 5 years later.
And it's such a great random moment when Scott comes back too. The van is in this junk. It's in a garage, just sitting there in a cage. I don't know how it got in this cage. And a rat does something, knocks over something.
It turns on the machine that brings him back.
He just comes out, and he's only kind of been gone like 5 minutes in his time.
5 hours.
5 hours in his time, and now he's out here after 5 years, and it's really wonderful seeing this new world from his eyes, because he's seen it for the first time, which is a great way, screenwriters, right?
Mm-hmm.
To show people this world and not tell them, because you're seeing it through his eyes.
Yep. And then he goes to his daughter, who's older, which is also a good scene, because that, again, calls back to the Ant-Man and Wasp movie, which had so much heart. And although Judy Greer, the actual mother of Cassie, doesn't get a role, but that's easily explained. Like, a lot of people disappeared. So from then on, we're in the Act 1 is mostly let's get the band back together, and that's a lot of fun, except Tony Stark. And what I talked about at the diner too was how, like, Hollywood has this idea, like, you're either in the Avengers constantly doing avenging things, or you live in a cabin in the woods and raise your family and do nothing but raise chickens and have a garden, and like there's no balance in Hollywood. It's like either you're completely retired and living in the middle of nowhere, or you're constantly in the middle of things.
Well, that's like the very first scene in the movie is Hawkeye having a little cookout with his family, and he's showing his daughter how to shoot a bow and arrow, and they're taken away by the snap, but he's out there in the middle of nowhere, retired. And then Tony Stark, you find him. Well, actually, secondly, you see Thanos, and he's retired, and he's hanging out, picking stuff from his garden, coming back.
Is there anybody who could just, like, I don't know, be in the Avengers and be like support, or maybe just show up once a month and do some crime fighting? Like, it just seems to be these extremes that
too all or nothing.
Yeah, and that was, I kind of get it in a movie where you're trying to, like, drive the story forward. But one of the things that they do with Hawkeye is they make him like Batman. He's like killing criminals. He goes nuts and he's killing criminals. And in some respects, they never really address that. Like, his character he gets his family back. Okay, so I'm not doing that anymore. You killed a lot of people, dude.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in this movie that aren't addressed, that are set up, which is, I don't know if that was just a conscious decision, like, screw it, it'll be okay, no one's gonna notice, or was it something that they wanted to pay off later but couldn't do it because the movie's already 3 hours long? I mean, there's basically like with Hawkeye, when you first see him after 5 years and he's this assassin or whatever going after the Yakuza, there's like a 2 or 3 minute long martial arts scene in the middle of the street before Black Widow shows up, and you think, am I like in like a ninja movie now or something? Or it was
Yeah, and he has a sword. He's using a sword instead of using his bow, which seemed gratuitous. Like, first off, he didn't use a sword at all when he was Hawkeye.
it was all bow and arrow.
He's all bow and arrow. Like, I wanted to see, if you're going to use Hawkeye, have the bow and arrow guy go up against sword guys, machine gun guys, but he keeps using the bow. Like, just use the bow in different ways. So I think that was lazy. That was like, oh, we have to give him something different to do kind of thing. I think that was a poor choice on the screenwriter's part. It was just like, oh, I want to do something different now. Like, no, that's not, no. You should have just come up with cool arrows. You could have come up with more arrows.
Yeah, he's just like, he's arrowed out. That's what happened there with them.
Yeah, he's not, I think they had to bring him back, to wrap this all up. But, if you're going to do that, then use Hawkeye. But
it was
a minor thing in the overall bigger problems.
It was cool how they brought the character back in the beginning, showing him out with his family, and then the emptiness of standing out there in the field after he looks for them, and in his reclusive state on a farm with gardens and stuff. That's what superheroes do and supervillains do when they retire. That's probably the main lesson we learned from the movie.
Yeah, so Act 1 is getting the band back together, and Thor, by the way, fantastic throughout the movie. The Big Lebowski Thor is my new favorite Thor.
Well, the reveal of Thor is, first of all, the Hulk and Rocket Raccoon are getting driven to New Asgard, and they're in the back of the truck, and just to let you know, since we're in spoiler territory, Hulk is like an amalgam of Bruce Banner and Hulk. So he's like sentient Hulk.
He's Smart Hulk.
Smart Hulk. And which is kind of cool. The special effects of that were actually kind of good. He looked good, and there's some funny stuff there with Hulk as sort of like a celebrity in this new world. And so they want to go get Thor, and they're going by the seaside in this truck, and it's kind of like this quaint little music they play, which I thought was interesting music. Kind of like taking you back into like a 70s Flower Child thing with this little commune by the sea, which is called New Asgard. And when you see Thor, it's just wonderful. Like this version of Thor is a joy.
Yeah, but the thing is, at the end of Thor Ragnarok going into Infinity War, weren't all the Asgardians dead? Didn't all the only Asgardians left were on the ship, except maybe Valkyrie, who could have been alive. Like she had her own ship. So like, where did all these Asgardians come from? Like, that was not made clear at all to me. I was confused. I thought they were all dead, and I thought the Infinity Gauntlet was going to bring them back. That's what I was predicting.
No, they're there in New Asgard, which that's another thing. The connective tissue between all the movies, it's a little thin with this movie. I think what was probably important to the screenwriters with this was to get like the emotional payoffs that people were looking for.
Right.
And how you got to those emotional payoffs wasn't as important, perhaps. Or
no, I agree. I think the emotional payoffs were all there because this movie was one giant payoff, essentially. But logistically, there are a lot of nerd-related problems here. So that's number one. That's the first big problem is, weren't all the Asgardians dead? It seemed to be implied by the fact that Thanos fights them in the ship, and there's big piles of bodies, and Thor gets thrown off the ship, and although maybe they survived. I don't know. I don't remember. I have to go back and see the movie now to totally confirm. maybe a few of them survive, or Thanos doesn't kill them all. Joan, do you know? So in Act Two, it's all about the time travel. And this is where screenwriters always get in trouble. Time travel is so tough to do and tough to do right. I will hand it to them that they had this theory like we can do time travel if we undo the damage we do with time travel. And that was at least a partial sort of thing. Initially they set up, but they break the rule in the third act. They break their own rule, and they can't possibly not destroy their own timeline by what they did.
Well, you're talking about the what's her name? What's Doctor Strange's mentor's name?
The Sorcerer Supreme.
Yes. So she.
I think she has a name on top of that, but yeah.
Yeah, I should know this, but
Tilda Swinton.
Tilda Swinton, who is a fine actress. I always like her in things. But she shows up, and she actually plays a pretty big role in that scene. That the Hulk goes to her to get the Time Stone, because she's got that, and she explains to Hulk that if you do this, there will be like deviations in the time frames. You have to like make sure that you return everything at this exact moment so it stays flowing in one direction.
Right. And so there's not alternative universes breaking off, which does tie into what the Marvel U used to say time travel was. Time travel in the Marvel U was you don't actually time travel, you actually transport yourself into another universe in a previous sort of earlier time, but you're not in your own timeline. You're not changing your own time. You're essentially abandoning that. In this, they're actually not changing the past, but they are stealing things from the past to augment the future.
But they have to take those items that they stole from the past and return them so the things that happened back then will still happen, which by the end of the third act, you will see doesn't add up.
Yeah, it doesn't matter at that point. So they go back in time, and of course, we get a callback to Avengers 1 in 2012. We get callbacks to Guardians of the Galaxy, a lot of that.
Thor: The Dark World, which is one of the most maligned movies in the MCU. Thor: The Dark World is probably many people's like least favorite movie, but in this one plays a big role.
Yep, unfortunately, because the only person in the MCU I hate more than Captain Marvel is Natalie Portman, who also sucks the energy, in my view, out of every scene she's in. And even in this movie, where she has no dialogue, I was like, oh no. Oh no, Natalie Portman, please don't talk. I was happy she didn't talk, though.
She's good in a movie called Annihilation, but that's another story.
That's another story. So, you know, a lot of this movie hinges on Dark World, which I still haven't seen all the way through. I've seen enough of it to know what happens, but I've never seen it all the way through.
Well, see, if that's another case of people who haven't seen Ant-Man and the Wasp, or the original Ant-Man, or many of these other movies that came before it, if you aren't like a hardcore MCU fan person, then a lot of this stuff's just going to go over your head.
Yeah.
Because they are actually within the Thor: The Dark World setting for a good 10 minutes of the movie.
Yep. And there's like all this messaging about women's empowerment in this movie, which I felt was just shy of being overbearing. So first you got Captain Marvel, who's just thrust upon the MCU, and you're beaten over the head with her. But in this movie, they at least pull it back.
Well, she doesn't even show up in the second act, though.
Yes, which is great. Then the second act is Thor's mother. Like, Thor can't function without going back to his mother, which works more than it doesn't work because it is his mother.
And Chris Hemsworth is such an amazing comedic actor that even to the point where he starts to cry, which is, you know, actually kind of sweet in a way, it does add a bit of comedy to it.
Yep.
That this grown man who is Thor, the God of Thunder, is, you know, now this Big Lebowski character who is just totally, you know, lost without his mother and has to reconnect with her to, like, find the strength to carry on. And even in that moment, it's Rocket who's the one who gets the job done.
Yep. And that was great to have a good scene with Rocket. And it was also good too because we didn't have to see Rocket and Natalie Portman interact. Although I really wanted to see Rocket zap Natalie Portman, and they didn't show it.
It might
But
have been suggested, but Natalie Portman, who we're not even quite sure if it was like a deleted scene or like an outtake from Thor: The Dark World that they used to bring her back, or there had to have been some agreement with her that she was in this movie for maybe a total of 5 seconds.
yeah, so
Because she, you know, unceremoniously was not even in the third movie, and not really. You do get some sort of explanation from Thor saying that Jane and him are no longer together, and he still has a bit of respect for her for some reason. I don't know. I mean, at least they give you some bit of a payoff, which this movie is all about.
yeah, and the fact that Thor acts the way he does in this movie, you can see why they're not together anymore. Like Thor's just falling apart, and it's great to see Thor being a beer swilling idiot because that's fun. And as I said at the diner, it's great to see Rocket still being an obnoxious a hole.
He's probably the most consistent character in the whole MCU. Is Rocket.
Yeah. Because they don't have to worry about insulting anybody, I guess, because he's a raccoon.
Or a rabbit, as Thor likes to call him.
That's right. Now the segue into Act 3 is actually very good because we have a really clever twist where it's Nebula who, her Wi-Fi is connected to the Nebula of that time, and that's how Thanos gets the gadget that allows him to come to the future and basically fight in the third act.
Well, yeah, there's two Nebulas, and what's her name? Karen Gillian, is that her name?
I don't know.
Gillen. Oh, we're gonna get some comments for that. But anyway, she's really good. She was also in Doctor Who. She's a good actress, and she shows off her acting chops playing two versions of herself in this, because the one from the past is still, on Thanos' side, and the one in the future is totally against Thanos. And for whatever reason, since she's been augmented and with these, circuitry and computer chips and everything, that there is a connection between the two of them, and they can find a timestamp, and that word is actually used in the movie. It's like a file or something within here that's timestamped with like 2000 whatever.
Yeah, this is alien technology, but they're using like terminology from like Windows or Avid.
It's like she's got a Word doc in her that's been timestamped with 2024.
But here's the thing. When Nebula shoots her earlier self, she doesn't die. So like, what's up with that? There's a big nerd problem right there. So like, I thought it would have been great if she shot herself and then she died. That would have been a great scene, right? It would have been like blam, like oh no,
yeah.
And then she just fades away.
Well, they never mentioned the word paradox in this movie, so I guess they weren't thinking about it.
Not at all. But as I said, in the MCU, there are no paradoxes. There are only alternate universes. So maybe they're going along with that. I think they just don't care at this point, and they're just wrapping it up. So we segue into the third act, which is essentially one gigantic fight, which again was a lot of fun, but does go on for a long time. Like the first round of Avengers fighting Thanos is great, but Thanos seems to be physically too strong as compared to the Thanos that was established. Without the gauntlet, you wonder why he can do all this. But there is a great scene where he takes one of the gems off. He's fighting Captain Marvel, and he takes the gem off, and then he uses it to punch her. Like that, I thought was a clever use of like showing, oh, this is how he's, amping himself up. But I wanted to see something else. Like Thanos, to me, he doesn't have the physical, ability to stand against Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man without any gauntlet, gadgets.
This is true. And it's just, once again, I think they just did what they wanted to do to get to these moments, which are very good at the end.
Yeah,
You know,
the Captain America with the hammer is the great moment in the film, I think, and
yeah, that really wowed the audience. They had alluded, and this is also something if you've never seen, I guess, Age of Ultron, where it's alluded that Captain America might be able to pull the Thor's hammer, and Thor gets a little nervous, you know, at one point where he's like, "Oh, wait a second," and then there's an awesome callback to where Thor goes, I knew it." That and so and there's a couple funny lines to where they're going to go after him, and Thor's got both the hammer and what's the name of his axe?
Stormbringer.
Stormbringer, and he throws the hammer to Captain America. Here, you take the little one. I mean,
Yeah, that was great.
without Thor, this movie might have. Without Thor, without Ant-Man, this movie might have just been falling apart.
It would have been drudgery, because even Iron Man was a bit dark in this movie too.
Yeah, he's not the wisecracking Iron Man that you saw in all the movies beforehand. He's turned into like this character who's you can kind of sense that there's this is like a final final act for him.
Yeah, but I did like that he saves everybody. I mean, for a moment there with the League of Extraordinary Women, really pissed me off. Like that was as our friend said, a Me Too, moment, a Me Too squad or whatever you want to call it, of all these women superheroes that just suddenly lined up for no reason, no sensible reason in the movie. It was pure like, oh, look at this. There are women in the movie. Women have superpowers, la la la. Like,
Well,
that was not driving the movie forward.
Not from like the Me Too perspective, political perspective. That's not what bothered me. It just felt like just forced to put all those characters, and then they did this big wipe across the screen where they all lined up, and you can just tell that some studio executive was like, "We're gonna do this," and the writers are like, "Oh, we'll figure it out." I mean, there's a lot of other people fighting this battle. I mean, why are these women lining up in this moment at the exact same time? That seems rather convenient.
Yeah. And Pepper Potts has a suit of armor, which is fine because they established that in this movie. But they gloss over what happened in Iron Man 3, which is Pepper Potts had the problem. She had gotten, what's that character's name? I want to say Metallo, but that wasn't his name.
Guy Pearce's character?
Guy Pearce's character. So she has the same disease he has, where she could turn into a molten person, and it's assumed Tony Stark cured her, but like I really wanted to see Tony Stark design a suit for her to use her powers.
Like a containment suit or something?
Yeah, and then that would have been a great explanation why she was way more powerful. Like she could be like Iron Woman, but like also have this weird molten lava power or whatever you call it. That would have been great. I would have liked to have seen that. But you know what? I think it was just a Hollywood decision to go, well, not enough people saw Iron Man 3. It wasn't a big movie, so let's just pretend that never happened.
It's strange because they have all this time to work on this stuff before they go into production. You can go through there and have an intern put a big thing on the wall, like a chart that shows every little thing that you want to make sure pays off in this final movie. You can do it. It just takes some time, and I just think they just didn't care about some stuff. They're like, whatever. Or they just forgot.
Yeah. And it would have been great motivation, too, for Tony Stark to have retired. That could have been part of his motivation. Not that he just gets all pissy and say, oh, we lost, and I'm going to raise a family now. It could have been like, I've got bigger problems. Like I have to go save the woman of my the love of my life is going to die unless I cure her of this malady. But they're so, I don't know, hung up on him having a family, I guess, and this payoff that they just decided, he cures her, and we'll just ignore that. But
Oh, big spoiler! Tony Stark, Iron Man, he dies in the movie. So
oh, and we glossed over, Black Widow being killed, which is, you know, again, and we talked about this. Black Widow should have gotten her own movie. Here's a strong, empowered woman character that everybody likes, and she didn't get her own movie, and they kill her.
yeah, they did her character a great disservice. Um, and she showed up organically in Iron Man 2, and her character had a great arc going from basically a spy who was a bit ruthless, and her tactics were definitely questionable, to somebody that everybody loved and trusted. Yeah, she definitely should have had her own film. And there's rumors that there's going to be a film. I don't know how they're going to do that now, unless it's a prequel or something. But
Or unless they, just say, well, because they Hulk alluded to, I tried to bring her back, so maybe she appears or whatever.
yeah, I think Scarlet Witch says something that leaves it open to the fact that she might be back. I don't think Iron Man's coming back. At least Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man.
Yeah.
I think he's done well for himself, and it would it would feel cheap now if he did come back, because his ending was actually quite emotional and powerful.
Yeah, I think though the Infinity Gauntlet was established as this godlike item that could do anything. So I don't see any reason why they couldn't have brought her back and Tony Stark dies. Like, that to me would have made the most sense, because it would have been like, Tony Stark does that, and then the Soul Stone that she sacrificed herself to create then explodes or whatever, and then kills Tony Stark, and it's kind of like an even trade. You get back Nat, but you lose Tony Stark. But I did like the big ending with Tony Stark. I did like, he finally beats Thanos, because it was all built around Tony Stark from Iron Man 1 to here. And it's a great place to end if you're a fan. I'll definitely go see Guardians 3, because I think Thor's in it now.
Oh yeah, Thor. Spoiler alert: Thor does live, and he actually looks like he's got an interesting future ahead of him. So hopefully, Chris Hemsworth will be in a few more movies. I'll definitely come back for that.
Of course, Spider-Man was a huge hit. Everybody cheered when Spider-Man showed up again, and I'm psyched for Homecoming. And
Far From Home.
Or Far From Home. That right. Homecoming was the other one. And this apparently ties into, it's sort of like the fallout of this movie. Far From Home sort of deals with. So I would guess it opens with Tony Stark's funeral.
Perhaps, yes. It might feel like sort of like a bridge in some ways, because Spider-Man definitely has to keep going. Tom Holland, who plays him, he's probably the best Spider-Man that we've seen.
Yeah, and I think they're driving that towards a Spider-Man Venom fight. Hopefully not a team up. I would like to see a fight. And we were also talking about the Spider Slayers might do the
Sinister Six,
or the Sinister Stick. Yeah, Sinister Six. Thank you very much. But overall, the movie's kind of a mess because of time travel. I mean, from a screenwriter's perspective, it's very hard to do time travel and make it work. It's the same old Terminator argument. If you wipe out Thanos, who is not the current Thanos who gets killed, he's the 2012 Thanos. So what happens to all the characters who fought Thanos after that point? So he killed Gamora. So if Thanos dies in 2012, the original Gamora doesn't die. She should be alive. A bunch of stuff that happens should then not happen, and it should be different. So,
they referenced quite a few time travel movies, including Back to the Future was a big one they referenced.
Yeah, and they're trying to say like, oh, well, we got this. Like, I appreciate the referencing, but at the same time, like, the referencing was like, hey guys, don't you know anything like about science? Which they kind of did with Hulk, and who else was arguing with them? I guess Captain Marvel. But overall, it's a good movie. Emotionally, from a screenwriting perspective, I think it's very problematic. But I don't think
Well,
anyone in Hollywood cares.
well, it does come back to time travel, and if you want to reference another time travel movie, Star Trek Generations, Sauron says, "Time is the fire in which we burn." One of my favorite lines of all time.
Yeah,
And we,
it's such a cheat, though. I think it's such
it
a
is a
cheat.
cheat.
Unless you're doing a time travel movie and you really get into it, like with Bill and Ted, it was fun time travel stuff.
Or the stakes are a little bit lower, or simpler might be. Like if you look at Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, they have to get the two whales back to talk to the alien ship
Mm-hmm.
to stop it from shaking up the planet. So that was very simple. You reintroduce the whales, and it's a fun adventure. But with this, there's so many different things going on. If you're a screenwriter looking at that, you are going to need a chart to figure out exactly what, and some things probably just slip up. There might have been some scenes that were written that they weren't able to do because it's already 3 hours long.
Or just got cut. They shot him and it just ended up being cut. Look at Deadpool. Deadpool did time travel. I mean, that's a comedy for the most part, but no one cares. Like, no one cares that Deadpool went back and saved all those people, even though he really kind of undid his own motivation. So, in this movie, it's like, oh, time travel's so important. Don't change the past. But then they do it in such a huge way. It's like,
Yeah,
why did you bother to give us this? Oh, don't do this, and then you do it anyway.
going in this movie, I was thinking, well, they're gonna have to bring all these characters back, and I was really hoping that it wasn't gonna be time travel. I'm like, did they figure out something different? But it's tough. I mean, when once you go down the time tracks, it's there's no going back. I mean, you're
Yeah,
committed to this, and you have to do your best to see it through. And to their credit, there's a lot of great stuff in the movie. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff. It's enjoyable, but I don't know if it's like infinitely rewatchable.
yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, even Infinity War, same thing. Like, they established this gauntlet, which also can travel through time and wind time, move time. So if if Thanos can do all that, it would have been easy for him to take the stones and, I don't know, send them back into the past. Let's say, boom, they're gone, poof. Like, he could have sent them back a million years. It makes no sense. The physics of it doesn't make sense. But you're willing to let it go for these payoffs, I think, for the most part. But I think a real screenwriter, if a screenwriter had been in charge of this movie, had the final cut, I think it would have been, no, 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 no. We have to go back and figure this out. I think it needed like another 2 or 3 rewrites.
Yeah, that would have been nice.
But overall, Endgame, if you're an MCU fan, go see it. If you're not, you'll just be totally confused, so don't waste your time. I want to thank CB for being a special guest here on A Screenwriter's Take. And of course, as always, Joan the dog, who went and is now asleep. We'll see you next time on A Screenwriter's Take.